cassette.
On June 25th, 2013, the popular and well-loved Let's Play channel Game Grumps announced something shocking. One half of the duo, John Travari, otherwise known as JonTron, would be leaving the channel forever. In the months that followed this announcement, many took to the internet to voice their upset, myself included. See, to many people, the way that the Game Grumps interacted with their audience and the way that the audience interacted back was far different from many of the creators that were out there. During a playthrough of the now infamous Sonic 06 game, the duo coined the term lovelies for their fans. Team this up with a focus on drawing attention to the animation community. With Game Grumps animated spots, there was a real sense of community that just wasn't found elsewhere. Both John and co-host Aaron Hansen, also known as Egoraptor, were both well-established creators outside of Let's Plays, so the conjoining of these two creators made what can only be described as a powerhouse. This too was evident even as far back as their first uploads. The Game Grumps were amassing millions of views a video. This made it that much more strange when John announced that he would be leaving. There was no natural conclusion, no mutual consensus that this would be what's best. Not even a proper goodbye video. Just here one day and gone the next. What made matters even stranger was that suddenly, it was like John had never even existed, as he was ushered out in exchange for New Jersey-born Lee Daniel Avidan and Perth-born Ross O'Donovan. It was a literal hard reset on the channel, and when it's all said and done, and we look at what the catalyst for these events happened to be, it's only then do we uncover just what happened, and those who refuse to take this transition at face value were right to do so.
You can run on for a long time, run on for a long time, run on for a long time. Sooner or later gotta cut you down, sooner or later gotta cut you down.
I don't know the backstory behind this one, but you said everything's good, so I can cut this. Okay, make note. Where the f*** is JonTron?
He's making his own videos. Why is Happily in New York?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is there a backstory?
Oh yeah. Well,
you guys used to work together?
The first host I had on Game Grumps was John. We started the show together, and then he left, and there was just this sort of like weird period where we weren't like acknowledging each other, because it was just kind of like it was weird. Like it was a little weird.
Is it like family leaving?
Yeah, kind of. It was just kind of like I don't know if I'm mad or not, and then it's like he was the same way, and so we just didn't really talk to each other for a while.
Go tell that long-tongued liar, go and tell that midnight rider, tell the rambler, the gambler, the backbiter, tell him that God's gonna cut you down, tell him that God's gonna cut you down, tell him that God's gonna cut you down.
Let's start at the beginning. It's 2001. The 90s are officially over, and the internet is extremely different to what it is today. For context, broadband internet wasn't available, so your internet? Dial up. This made sites like YouTube a far-off vision. At this time on the web, if you wanted your entertainment, it would come in the form of a plugin, Macromedia Flash, and it was king. Flash was created by a team of developers in the early 90s and was the biggest push ever for rich content on the web. Throw in that it was a very versatile animation tool, and Flash shaped the way that many of us would remember the internet forever. Websites like Newgrounds and Albino Black Sheep became the Mac Daddies of online entertainment, hosting stellar animated content and incredible games, both of which achieved a cult-like status over the years. This dominance would be maintained until 2005, when YouTube would launch operations paving the way to online video content for the first time ever. For clarification, what you have to understand is that animation was huge at the birth of the modern internet. Most of the animations were made by one person, typically a kid in their bedroom, and this sort of community opened up the gate to many greats in the world of online content, such as Weeble, Ill Will Press, Sam Baksar, Sexual Lobster, and Neil Cicierega. One of those greats happened to be a young 14-year-old Aaron Hansen. Aaron created his Newgrounds account the Sunday after 9/11 of all days, and whilst it remained largely dormant for 3 years, this would change in 2004 with his first ever animation, Final Fantasy VII Flash spoof. To say that Aaron's content was, to put it delicately, different in this era would be the understatement of the century, but aspects of this sort of behaviour play a very important role later down the line. Aaron would rise to fame in a really big way in animation, with the now oldest public upload on his Newgrounds account, Metal Gear Awesome. This had a profound impact on the entire internet at the time. Pulling in 7.5 million views in the early internet was huge, especially in the world of Flash content. The reviews were pouring in, and Aaron was becoming famous. As the age of YouTube dawned, Aaron adapted beautifully to it, uploading content both live action and animated to the platform, with his signature, albeit now more refined, sense of humour. He had become an internet household name. People knew who Ego Raptor was. And then there is John Jafari. For most people, they have always known John as a game review, reaction channel, commentator, but certainly not an animator. But this was not the case. John indeed dabbled in animation under the pseudonym Birdman XZ6 on Newgrounds, with a series of 4 animations about onions.
Alright, Ashley, just carefully take a step. Oh, no.
Digging further through this handle, we even find a Minecraft Let's Play of sorts, with John and ex-editor of Game Grumps Barry Kramer playing around.
Oh no. Barry, it cleared it.
Both Barry and John have a lot of history together, previously attending the same school, where footage exists of the two of them with 2 other friends performing a song to their class, presumably for some assignment. The 2 of them would even become roommates. This is around the time that John would pave the way to allow the birth of a brand new channel, where he'd focus on the comedic reviews of games and movies. He'd call this channel JonTron. In the entire history of JonTron, the channel would amass over 1 billion views. People loved his humour and the subject matter Jafari would bring to the platform, making him one of the most instantly recognisable comedy YouTubers in the world. It wasn't until John reviewed Dino City that his video happened across the path of Aaron, who instantly fell in love with John's videos. The two messaged back and forth and quickly became friends. John had been a fan of Aaron for a long time, having watched all of his Newgrounds animations. To say that John was a little starstruck would be putting it lightly.
I released Dino City, and I was like nobody at that point. But I mean, like, I had maybe like 5.
Got it.
I had maybe like 5,000 subscribers. I released the Dino City video. Somebody put it on Reddit, and it hit #1 on Reddit, and it got a ton of views, and I got like over 10,000 subscribers. And so Aaron saw my video, and he subscribed to me, and I'd been a fan of him since I was like 15. So. Freaked out. I sent him a message. You actually sent me a message. I didn't get it, and I didn't know that till much later. When I went back and looked through my messages, and I messaged you, and then you were just like, you were like, hey, I'm in Burbank. You want to come down? I was in Texas at the time, so I was upset. And so I came down to see. Oh no, we decided that you're like, well, let's be friends. You're like so forward about it. It was weird to me at the time.
This instant friendship would blossom over the years, with the two friends even starring in a video of JonTron's before Game Grumps would get underway. According to them both, the idea for the show came about when the two were arguing over whether or not Wolf from Super Smash Bros. Brawl was too similar to the character Fox in terms of their fighting styles. After being told that they had both become grumpy when discussing subject matter like this, they decided that it may have some merit to record into an original format. Aaron drew and animated the famous Grump heads that afternoon, and, in typical low-effort fashion, beatboxed the opening.
I just like put the microphone on the ground and I was like, alright. And I remember just like, 'cause I was really into like mouth sound songs at the time.
Right.
So, we just did that. I was just like, and I did like the
That's the ironic thing.
and then John was like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I was like, "Don't worry about it." And then I sat at the computer for 10 minutes and then played it back, and everyone was like, whoa, sweet, it's a theme song.
The premise and the show was there. Now all they had to do was record. And on July 19th, 2012, the first video was uploaded, Kirby Superstar, and it was phenomenal. Aaron and John were met with almost instant praise for their new show. Being already well-established creators really helped them get a leg up into their new channel, and audiences loved how well the two of them worked with each other. It was clear how they were real friends, having a really good time with each other. People loved that, and how connected it made them feel. It was a different feeling to some of the other Let's Play channels where you'd focus on one individual. Suddenly, you felt a part of something. Over the next year, John and Aaron would put out consistently great episodes, with some notable fan favourites, such as Sonic 06, Banjo-Kazooie, even games like Monopoly and Mary-Kate and Ashley Sweet 16, which on the surface seemed like odd choices, really worked well with the show's format and comedy. The Grumps had everything they ever wanted. A thriving, rapidly growing channel, a great friendship, a greater show, and an upcoming convention, E3 2013. All was well, and the only way was up. Except, below the surface there was a lot more going on. For the two friends, owning a very fast-growing channel with a promising future had both its pros and cons, and from what it seems, the cons would be the ones that would win out. Aaron and John would often have strong disagreements behind closed doors about what they wanted from Game Grumps. With Aaron being primarily an animator, he'd found he'd hit it big time with Game Grumps, as the amount of time it took to churn out a single animation simply didn't have to be a thing anymore. John, on the other hand, had a much easier time being able to return to doing JonTron episodes whenever he pleased. Sure, it took a long time to write, shoot, edit, and upload, but it was no animation. Because of these differing factors, both Aaron and John had entirely different views of what Game Grumps was to them and to their audience. John saw it as an opportunity to kick back, podcast or livestream style, and hang out with a good friend. Aaron, on the other hand, never wanted to go back to animation ever again, not whilst there were far easier alternatives available. This frustration with how each other took Game Grumps to be would culminate on E3 2013, where suddenly the pair went from hanging out with each other to eerily distant. Aaron would even attend a live show from the game station with editor Barry Kramer, instead of JonTron. Even figures like Grant Kirkhope were asking where John had vanished to, with the official explanation: the flu. A day of silence then passed on June 14th, 2013. The day after, on June 15, Game Grumps would put out a tweet stating the following: "Due to circumstances beyond our control, we have to return to one-a-day Grumps. Please bear with us, we're doing the best we can." 10 days later, it was all over. John had left the channel in a 2-minute and 40-second video uploaded to the Game Grumps YouTube channel. The official explanation was to give more time to JonTron, with Lee Daniel Avidan, or Danny, taking his spot as the new not-so-grump. Oh, and there would be a new show called Steam Train 2, with Rubber Ross and Danny as well, which is sort of like Game Grumps but more PC-focused. And this was to happen effective immediately.
I'm gonna miss him so much. Who on earth am I gonna be playing games with now? You Piccadilly whore! What?
The suddenness of this change hit people like a ton of bricks. On the one hand, you had a sudden breakup of two people that millions adored. On the other hand, it was made out that the friendship was disposable, as John could literally be replaced by another person overnight. This resulted in a huge backlash towards Danny in the early days of Game Grumps. For a large percentile of their audience, it suddenly wasn't the channel they had subscribed to anymore. They came to see Aaron and John and their humour, not this Dan guy or that weird new show Steam Train.
When I look back at those early episodes, the Punch-Outs and the Super Mario 2, I can hear in my voice, like,
The
how
nerves.
Yeah, just how badly I wanted to do a good job, you know? Because like because John is such a good performer and like a tough act to follow, and like because I didn't want to blow it for you and Barry and Susie, and like suddenly you guys are out of jobs because I sucked, you know?
But as the dust settled and people got used to Danny, and how his humour could work just as well with Aaron's as John's ever could, people warmed to him, and in a big way too. As for the respect, this came when Dan opened up very candidly about his history battling severe depression. Subjects like this weren't really spoken about by creators at this point in YouTube's lifespan, let alone with the degree of transparency into his life that Dan offered in the episode.
When I was struggling with it, my mind would be racing constantly. I almost failed out of school because of it, because I couldn't go to my classes. Like, I didn't really leave like my apartment for maybe like 5 months, something like that. And I'll never forget, dude. Like, it was the weirdest thing. Like, I was at my friend Adam's house, and I was sitting on the computer, and I said something, and he was like, "Dude, just stop obsessing about that shit." And it was just one of those weird, like, unconscious, like, things, and I just randomly typed in obsession into like Google search terms or whatever, and all these pages on obsessive compulsive disorder came up, and like I started reading about it, and I just like fucking immediately started crying, because like I was like, oh my god, I'm not fucking crazy.
People grew to love Danny a lot, maybe in some cases more than John. There was no denying how much of a great fit he was for the channel. Here was a funny, smart, handsome and well-likeable down-to-earth guy, which was almost the antithesis of a YouTube creator. As their show progressed and evolved, Steam Train ended up doing great. A new show, Table Flip, launched to some interesting feedback that we'll cover later. Steamrolled and Grumpcade, to name but a few. Game Grumps had quickly spiraled into a mega hub of Let's Plays, even launching a new channel, Grump Out, for live action stuff. This new version of Game Grumps was loved, with most people starting to move on from it. But for some, they did notice a lot of weirdness going on, with the biggest question being as follows: why did they never even mention John again? This is arguably the most confusing part of the entire history of Game Grumps. It was jarring enough that John had left, and on the very same day, with zero hesitation, there was someone new to fill his shoes. Someone who had not been previously introduced. Someone who had just showed up to claim John's spot without a moment's notice. It was if your parents had replaced a well-cherished dog with a new one the moment it met an untimely end, giving it the same name and expecting no hurt. It was ultimately so offensive to fans who had both subscribed to and followed Game Grumps. The final nail in the coffin was how John was simply not mentioned, not even once. It was something that was innocuous at first, with only a few people noticing it, but this crowd simply became larger and larger as time would go on. Even other members of the Grumps team, such as Susie, would become immediately hostile if John was ever brought up or mentioned, giving the entire shift a really strange vibe. For a channel that was so community focused, it seemed as if Aaron and now Danny were vehemently ignoring them. It got so weird that a new subreddit, Conspiracy Grumps, opened up to try to dissect the answers. It seems funny looking back on it now, but when all the audience wanted was clarification on what happened so they could understand and move on from it too, that one bit of information seemed incredibly sparse. What made matters worse too was that friends of both Aaron and John acted really weird as well, with the late Total Biscuit stating in a reply to a fan, "I know exactly what happened, but there's no chance that anyone is going to end up finding out. That stuff is buried." When the internet was left to speculate about what may have happened, a lot of people raised the idea straight away that John's then girlfriend Nicole was the catalyst behind the move, and referred to her as a Yoko Ono figure. When Jerry Terry, a friend of John's, was asked about this, he responded to it with the following: "Actually, the opposite is true. John had been wanting to move to New York City for a while. Nicole kept telling him not to do it. So you have Nicole to thank for the extra month or so that John stayed. Less of a Yoko Ono, more of a Yoko Oh yes, am I right?" He'd then go on to clarify, "I'm friends with Nick, and I can confirm that she was against John moving at the time. John chose to move of his own accord, for other reasons. It saddens me when I find a ton of comments on my own videos throwing accusations at one of my friends, armed with proof that they've cobbled together from a few internet sources. If you're looking for a manipulative Yoko-esque figure, you're definitely firing in the wrong direction." Which people took to be a nod at Susie Bearhow, the wife of Aaron Hansen. People looked at Susie with a highly critical light as she took more of a central role in Game Grumps, with a lot of people thinking that she detracted from two friends having a good time and a laugh and a joke with video games. As the channel had turned into a creator hub with people of different shows and different personalities, no longer Aaron and John, she suddenly had a bigger presence than ever. Susie would also be the one to react most frustratedly when asked about John's departure.
You want to know? You really want to know? To work on JonTron. That's right, we said it. He said it. Can we please put this to rest now? How many times must we say it?
With it being made increasingly clear that the breakup wasn't amicable, people had only the tidbits of information to gather, based on what was said by the Grumps themselves and John at panels, with several raising the question, what did happen to JonTron? On the one side, the Grumps palmed off the answer with a repeat of what they said in the video Ode to John. But John, on the other hand, made it clear that he could not say the same. In fact, he made it clear he was gagged on the topic.
All right, I'll just say it. I don't know. I'd say the hardest part of my career is probably the Game Grumps Aftermath, because we fucking A. What can I and cannot say? I can't say it, but I will say that I think the dishonesty in the matter has been bad. That's the hardest part of my career.
However, this, if you can believe it, wasn't the strangest thing to come off the back of the departure. On 21st of August 2014, a rather peculiar episode of Game Grumps was to be uploaded. An episode of Super Mario 3D World, Part 18 to be exact.
Wow, we really Where is Stamp?
Bacon! Where is Stamp? Oh, that's the wrong one. It's just like, Bacon!
Look, it's a beautiful level.
Okay. Alright.
Marvelous.
Okay, buddy.
Yeah!
Did you catch it? Let's run it by once more.
Okay. Alright.
Marvelous.
Okay, buddy.
Yeah!
Still not seeing it? Allow me to explain. Super Mario 3D World contained a pretty cool feature called Miiverse. Miiverse was a social network for the Nintendo line of products that allowed in-game communication with players, being able to interact and share messages by way of text, handwritten messages, and drawings using the Wii U gamepad. This was a great feature that the Grumps used to great effect and to react midway through playing the game. The only problem is, they didn't anticipate that someone would use this opportunity to send a very clear message to Aaron and Danny. What looked like an empty post can be seen coming in from the right of the screen before it is quickly dismissed. There's only one problem. Miiverse didn't allow you to submit blank posts on the platform. What's more strange is Aaron's energy and mood take a notable nosedive when this happened.
Okay. Alright.
Marvelous.
Alright. Whatever. I don't give a shit.
This raised a lot of alarm bells with the community and conspiracy grumps jumping into action. What they found was nothing short of shocking. Game Grumps had censored the episode and erased footage. A break in the footage was found, where the blank card rolled in from, making it clear that aspects of the footage had been replaced. For Game Grumps to go out of their way to doctor footage in the same vein as Stalin with the infamous Moscow Canal photograph, something pretty shocking had to be there, right? Something violent or pornographic. Not quite. You see, Nintendo kept a public feed of all Miiverse posts that were paraded in their games, and in the order that they showed up. All people had to do was go check. The running order was as follows. A bunch of rabbit stamps by Brandon, confirmed. Beautiful level by Nutty, confirmed. This level is so pretty by Ale, confirmed. Mushroom, Bricks, and Mario by Jakey Me, a lie. You see, Jakey Me's post wasn't due to show up at all in this chain of Miiverse posts. In fact, it was used to cover up the real one. So, what was his post? Black handwritten text on a white background. Game Grumps. Acknowledge JonTron. By this point, you'd probably agree that this sort of behaviour is borderline concerning. The sudden change, and the rate in which John mentions were obliterated from the channel, suddenly seemed to be less about he never came up in conversation, to we must never speak of this man ever again. A Twitter user, JMagnum69, tweeted an image of the evidence, tagging both Egoraptor and JonTron Show. The caption, why? This tweet got a ton of likes and retweets, with it culminating with John himself retweeting the post. And, as if like clockwork, future episodes of Super Mario 3D World would not include Miiverse posts owing to a mysterious Wi-Fi issue plaguing the Grumps room.
We couldn't get the Wi-Fi working in the new Grump room.
So we don't have fucking Miiverse posts?
I'm sorry. We tried our best. We got like a Netgear like repeater to like make the signal stronger, and it didn't even come with instructions. So we're like, what do we do? And then it's like, open up the Netgear app. And then we opened up the Netgear app, and it told us literally nothing.
This game is really sad without the Miiverse posts.
I know, honestly.
I feel so alone.
I know. I miss.
We had like a nice community thing happening.
I miss all the people cheering us on.
Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely have it working next time. So.
Next time there won't be any fucking episodes left.
Oh yeah. Next time on Game Grumps, a Super Galaxy.
Okay.
Ha!
Now, I for one, do not for a minute believe that they had turned off their Wi-Fi to prevent me posts from showing up. But when information is this thin on the ground and a ton of people weren't convinced at all, especially after it transpired that the Grumps were ready to censor the episode, what else could people think? See, if Aaron and Danny would have laughed about the post and made some sort of joke about it, it would back up strongly that John just simply wasn't brought up. But because such a big deal was made out of it, with Aaron's mood crashing and the erasure of history going on, people began to ask themselves, what else wasn't Game Grumps saying? It culminated with Aaron himself responding to a Reddit comment with the following.
By explaining this, I'm going against what I'm about to say, but it's become enough of a conversation that I feel it does need some closure. John wanted to move on from Game Grumps. The best way to respect that is for us to move forward. John was obviously a huge part of Game Grumps, and he connected with a lot of people. But the more that we make him a conversation, the more it drags him back into a project he wants to put behind him. If I'm constantly saying, oh, back when John and I said this, it just brings back all that tension and emotion back. Yeah, I miss John, or man, it was better with John, or bring John back. It's my responsibility to continue the show without him because he wants to focus on other things. I don't want to anchor him to this show, just as much as I'm sure he doesn't want to constantly loom over us, damning us from moving on and growing. At the same time, we are doing our very, very best to put on a great show for everyone. And the more we bring up John, the more it becomes about what we were, and not who we are. It can be frustrating at times because we are so proud of the work we are doing. We want new lovelies to see us as we are, and not a show that was once something, but is now something else. I hope you can understand, and it's with the best of intentions. It comes from a place of respect, and it has often been a hard decision to commit to.
This in turn brought John to the Game Grumps subreddit to call Aaron out for bending the truth.
Hey guys, John here. It has come to my attention multiple times that I'm apparently being spoken for, and I wish to put that to rest. The post a while back that Aaron posted on the subreddit was partially true, but certainly was not something I discussed with him, and I feel like it was a move to get your support rather than to help me out. I have never wanted to abandon my Game Grumps fans, or not be talked about. I'm happy that the work I did on Game Grumps entertained you for so long, and I'm sorry I quit out on you guys so unexpectedly. And I am happy where I am, making JonTron and working on other projects. But I just wanted to dispel this fact, which is completely false.
When a fan, Nevada Zero, responded to John about what the future of one of the rules-keeping JonTron-related content of the subreddit, he too responded.
I absolutely appreciate every last one of you, whether you like me from Game Grumps or if you like me from JonTron. You are the reason I even get to wake up and make awesome stuff every day. Why would I want you to stop talking about me? It's simply ridiculous. I hope you can all take this to heart.
And, interestingly, he signed off the message with the following.
I'm not trying to put Game Grumps behind me, but maybe they are? Food for thought.
So, what does that leave us with? The breakup was absolutely not amicable. There's no evidence to support this was the case owing to the general weirdness exhibited by both sides. Aaron is resolutely quiet on this matter. If you ignore it, it goes away. But John is itching to say what happened, but seems unable to. So what was keeping them from discussing it properly and putting all of this to bed? The answer would come from Aaron's dad, Lloyd Hansen, or Papa Raptor. Like any self-respecting father, Papa Raptor was seen in lots of parts of the internet championing the empire his son had built. He'd interact with fans on Twitter, get involved with discussions on Reddit, even starring as Aaron in the 2013 video Game Grumps Does a Thing.
Look at this sandwich-ass sandwich, right, John? Good point, Barry. Play some non-copyright music over that.
So, it's only natural that when Aaron and John were to separate, and John making subtle hints that Aaron was lying about his departure, Paparaptor would jump into conversations and actually be quite active on the Conspiracy Grumps subreddit, quickly coming to the defense of Aaron on several occasions. Interestingly enough, when people would start calling Aaron a liar about John leaving the show owing to situational evidence presented to us in tidbits by John himself, Paparaptor would be quite vocal that throughout it all, Aaron had not only been telling the truth, but had remained honest on his stance that John wanted to leave the show without outside forces pushing him away. He mentions this in a response to a user and, very interestingly, dropped a bombshell of a clause that would finally end years of questioning why neither parties were forthcoming about the real reason that the two split up.
You certainly are under no obligation to believe me, nor anything my son has said. But he has been honest. The fact is, you don't know all the facts. Honesty does not mean answering every question that is asked. The NDA exists, and neither John nor Aaron can talk about it. That may be eventually negotiated away, but for now, neither side can accurately tell their side of the story. So, in this case, silence is golden.
So, that settles it. An NDA exists. When quizzed about whether the NDA was a non-disclosure or non-disparagement, Paparaptor indeed confirmed it was the former. The fallout was so big and eclipsed so much that in order to protect brands and businesses, a non-disclosure agreement was signed by both John and Aaron. What could possibly be so bad that a literal legally binding document had to be signed? Doing some research myself into common clauses for NDAs, the main reason is settlements. And you know, I get it. John left a business he co-founded and should be due some financial settlement to effectively be bought out of the business or agree upon an income from Game Grumps Incorporated. It could also be the fact that NDAs are signed when there is a potential for hostility, where one may make critical or insulting comments towards an employer or an employee, customers, viewers in this case, or clients. Now this last fact is interesting for a few reasons, namely Game Grumps joining the then new at the time MCN Polaris. MCNs, or multi-channel networks, were a lot more popular a few years back versus nowadays. Essentially, it offloaded a lot of the running and the admin of tanks, salary, business, etc. to a company for a cut of the ad revenue and let the creator just get back to being a creator. With lots of YouTubers never having run their own business before, let alone paying tax, MCNs were a great option in theory. In practice, however, they were often far from it, promising sponsorship deals and promotion when in reality just collecting money off the top of your advertising revenue. The Game Station was one of these MCNs featuring the likes of PewDiePie, Yogscast, Total Biscuit, as well as importantly, Game Grumps. The Game Station did really well until it was bought by Disney-owned Maker Studios and rebranded into Polaris. This injection of funding and direction from such a large company from Disney was great as it enabled large budget productions including Pacific Rim, Training Day on the Polaris channel, but also shows on the respective creators' channels such as Starcade on JonTron. One of these highly polished and produced shows would be the new show under Game Grumps' umbrella, Table Flip.
Old-fashioned games
and new-fashioned friends.
Come on everybody, this is Table Flip.
On the surface, Table Flip seemed like a solid show, hosted by Susie Bearhow and Barry Kramer. It seemed like a logical next step for the Game Grumps to further Aaron's idea of a hub of creators. The show concept involved the hosts and special guests dressing up in Victorian attire, playing a variety of card and board games. The show format allowed the comedy of the guests and the host to work extremely well off each other, and some episodes did really well for the channel, raking in millions of views. So how come this went so wrong for the Grumps, furthering this Let's Play Hub idea? Well, it was the producers of the show, and Game Grumps MCN, Polaris, that would end up shooting down their own creation, and it all started with one word: sling.
We're playing Pictionary again! How about that, huh?
It's a table flipping, Barry.
Table flipping. Flip table. We're doing Pictionary with lovely people. We're gonna draw some pictures and laugh
It's a
at them.
fan favorite. We have some recurring cast members that I know you guys are gonna love. So be sure to tune in. It's live right now.
It is. So check it out.
Sling was, and continues to be, a US-only streaming service created in January of 2015. The gimmick of the service was that for all intents and purposes, Sling would allow cable cutters to stream live television, as well as catch up, using the service with offerings from ESPN, Cartoon Network, History Channel, Adult Swim, CNN, as well as our good friends at Polaris. See, Sling was Maker, and subsequently Polaris's, big bet on raking in more income for their highly produced shows that they had going with their creators. After all, with all of the big budget shows they were producing, the ad revenue share alone didn't fully cut the mustard, so to speak. For Game Grumps' point of view, none of the intricacies mattered, as after all, the contract stipulated that they get a highly polished, produced show with set, costumes, lighting, cameras, as well as operators, even catering. What's more, these videos would go up on the Game Grumps YouTube channel, and they'd get the ad revenue from their shiny new show, with the only stipulation being that they had to market Sling as being the place to watch new episodes before they went live. For Aaron and crew, it seemed too good to turn down. The deal was signed, and Table Flip went into production. Not long after, however, the barrage of Table Flip new episode on Sling videos started, and people hated them. See, what made Sling special is that it was the first platform of its kind where users would pay to see episodes of shows early on YouTube. Services like Patreon or Nebula were still far off, so the concept of paying for a subscription service for exclusive content was pretty new to an audience who was used to getting content for free. What essentially this left was two camps, one who absolutely hated Sling and everything it stood for, calling out Game Grumps for selling out for content. Why would we pay for content that's just going to come out later? What's the point? With the other half genuinely happy to support Game Grumps. It was the second half of the audience, however, that got the second gut punch from the deal. Sling was US only, so if you happened to live anywhere else in the world, which a good percentage of the Game Grumps audience did, you couldn't even sign up. It got so bad too that the trailers asked international audiences to just be patient while Sling looked into expanding into other countries, something that to this day still has not happened. And because the deal mandated that the Grumps shill Sling, come off the new episode on Sling, come off the dislikes and angry comments. What a lot of people took from this was Game Grumps were trying to make a quick buck, or that they were withholding episodes from YouTube, as the concept of early access simply didn't exist. Susie Bearhow even went as far as posting about the deal on Twitter in an attempt to placate angry fans.
Polaris is the ones that set up the deal. You are not paying for episodes of Table Flip, you're paying to see episodes early. All episodes end up online. Once we are out of Table Flip episodes, there will be no more. We were locked into a contract where Maker owns half the show, so we can't make it without them. We just got stuck in a bad contractually obligated web show, and had to be adults and deal with it. At the end of the day, you all still get the free content that we genuinely love making. Just trying to get some transparency out there. We're not trying to screw over our international fans. I love you all and appreciate you.
Now, why am I mentioning Table Flip in a video about John and Aaron's separation? Well, purely because Table Flip was part of a bigger picture of what the Game Grumps were trying to be, as opposed to what it once was. If we take stock of the John era of Game Grumps, and what it was, with two friends on a couch playing games and joking around, versus management, MCNs, Steam Train, Grumpcade, Grump Out, Steamrolled, and of course the aforementioned Table Flip, with contracts and crew, it's practically worlds apart. It's why when Table Flip was part owned by Maker, and the Grumps were contractually obligated to advertise Sling as part of their deal, did many people ask, if Polaris was involved heavily in one of their shows, who's to say they weren't heavily involved in all of them? As both Table Flip and Starcade were produced by Polaris, and subsequently Maker Disney, it wouldn't be totally out of the question to put the NDA down to Polaris protecting two of what is essentially its IPs from disparaging the other if the fallout had been so severe. When the contract with Polaris was up, Table Flip was unfortunately on the chopping block, as it seemed unnecessary for Game Grumps Incorporated, the company, to fight for ownership rights on an idea that by very design demanded crew, costumes, guests, etc. And on the 12th of October 2016, the last episode of Table Flip was uploaded. The top comment noted that it was an old one, owing to Susie's tattoo being incomplete and Aaron's hair length. Sling was not promoted. After the dust had settled, both Susie and Barry, the showrunners for Table Flip, shared their thoughts on Twitter.
To everyone who has joined us on our journey with Table Flip, thank you. This was Barry and mine's first time producing a large-scale show, and we simply could not have done it without our crew, friends, and followers. Because of Table Flip, we got to stretch our wings and meet other creators. The last episode ever went up today. A chapter has closed. I look forward to our next big project. Table Flip, if nothing else, has been a learning experience. It was our first time working with a full crew, with guests, on a set, with catering. Despite that, I'm very proud of what we created, mostly due to the incredible crew and guests we had the pleasure of working with. Thank you all, and of course, thank you to the fans who have supported us and stuck with us. You allowed us to make this crazy costume show for 3 goddamn years. Thank you.
And, just like the other shows that made Aaron's dream of an empire once a reality, Table Flip became a footnote in the annals of time of the history of Game Grumps. And that simply was the case for all the other shows on Game Grumps' YouTube channel. With Grumpcade ending in 2019, Steam Train and Steamrolled in 2018, major faces like Barry and Ross would go on to do other things, and the operation slowed down. Before long, it was just Game Grumps again. Danny stuck around with Aaron to host, but it was more of a diet version to appease YouTube guidelines with swearing censored and thumbnails more clickbait than ever. It's funny, and maybe cruelly ironic, that the very show format, 2 friends laughing and playing video games with minimal editing, the show that he was trying to escape, was the very show that caught up with Aaron in the end. Nowadays, the Grumps just aren't doing what they used to. They have at time of recording 5.37 million subscribers, but on average pull between 100 to 300,000 views a video. John, meanwhile, has been doing great by comparison, sitting at just over 1 million more subscribers, but pulling inconsistently multi-millions of views a video. You could even say that the departure has been the best thing for John, with his content doing so much better as a result. John with his Starcade series has also fared much better than the Grumps' Table Flip as well. I mean, sure, both were adored by their respective audiences, but the difference in views and engagement really do show how much more tuned into Starcade people ended up being. John would go on to mention that while he lacked creative control over the first couple of episodes of Starcade, despite writing them, he later regained a lot more creative freedom with the show in later episodes, which could, for all we know, indicate a desire to control the output on Maker/Polaris' point of view. So, it bodes the question, was Polaris the ones who instigated the NDA? Upon conducting research into this, I find it very unlikely. I mean, it's a very good argument to make for sure, but it's most likely just a victim of circumstance. Ross, who joined Game Grumps at the same time as Danny, made a point of commenting about Polaris owning Game Grumps, the brand, on Reddit, indicating that Polaris and Maker never really having much control over the running of the day-to-day operations in such a way that would warrant an NDA to be written up.
We aren't owned by Polaris, and we're not owned by Disney. Polaris is an MCN. They just run advertisements on our channel and occasionally gauge interest in brand deals with us. We're turned down a lot, more than usually lately. Maker, Polaris, and Disney have no claim to Game Grumps other than that partnership dude. We run Grumps without having to answer to these companies. It's always very funny when people draw conclusions over how much power they think Polaris has over what we do. Seriously, do research into what a YouTube partnership is first.
This ultimately makes it clear that the NDA existed on a personal level as opposed to a professional one. Polaris, whilst they wanted control over their shows that they have financed, which is understandable, never really had much involvement outside of that. So then, if it wasn't Maker and Polaris, what was the source and reason for the creation of the NDA? That answer would become clearer as time would go on. For a long time, it really did feel like we continued resolutely down this avenue, with both sides staying quiet on the matter owing to the non-disclosure agreement, and Game Grumps pretending that John had never ever existed. But then suddenly, on January 25th, 2015, a post was uploaded to Conspiracy Grumps, which would change everything. User Kobernick the Rebirth posted a simple Instagram link with the caption,
Aaron and John took a photo together with a fan. Not sure if it's conspiracy worthy, but I thought it was interesting.
The photo was indeed of the two of them, seemingly as if things were totally normal. The two of them hanging out again. A mere couple of days after the photo had surfaced, 594 days after he left, on February 9th, 2015, John was finally brought up on Game Grumps.
Hey, I'm Grump. I'm not so Grump, and we're the Game Grumps.
I'm sorry.
Do you think John's gonna be sad that he no longer holds the record?
Probably.
No, he'll be fine.
No.
He loves it. What's up, Johnny boy? We love you, girl.
Hey, baby.
How you doing?
Give me a kiss.
Give me some of your sweet sexy.
Hey, stop.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got it. Yeah, I got carried away
That's
there.
for me.
But yeah,
Can't have that for anyone else but me.
much respect to Sonic 06, but holy shit, Pokemon Fire Red. I feel it. I feel the love now.
The sudden mention of John threw people for a loop. 36.91% of the entire comments of the video remarked at how suddenly John was back on the menu for discussion. A million questions were asked. Had they made up? Had this supposed feud ended? Had the NDA cleared? Was John going to make his way back to Game Grumps? Something must have suddenly changed for the two of them to not only be pictured together, but for John to be mentioned on the very show that he left. After all, this had totally come out of left field for the Game Grumps attitude of ignore it until it goes away. Now all we needed was the two of them in a video together. And on December 15th, 2015, fans of both channels would be given an early Christmas present.
Take my mask off, John. One last time. Let me look on you with my own eyes.
Aaron?
John.
Rejoiced to see the two together again. The post linking the video became one of the most upvoted on the Conspiracy Grumps subreddit. It seemed as though the two of them had put their differences aside and finally started talking again. People were happy, and whatever had happened between them was enough to look past. This was an important step towards finding out just what truly had happened between the two creators. Fans knew that if Aaron and John had overlooked whatever happened between them enough to star in a video together, nothing else really mattered, right? After all, if they were truly okay with each other, the supposed incident can't have been nearly as bad as each other made out. Then, John landed himself in hot water with some comments that he made on a live stream, and what semblance of relationship that was slowly starting to reform were quickly dashed.
Okay, so do you think that poor blacks probably commit more crime relative to wealthier black people?
They do. Wealthy blacks also commit more crime than poor whites. That's a fact.
Wait, what?
See, John has a long history of saying some pretty reprehensible things in his career as a YouTuber, no doubt. His tirade on race-fueled comments were renounced by a lot of close friends too. Gerard Khalil was one of these friends, who publicly came out mentioning how hurt he was from these comments. Being a son of an immigrant, he felt those words were directly targeting him. This would ultimately result in JonTron deciding to leave Normal Boots, a collective he'd set up with Gerard, Peanut Butter Gamer, Chadtronic, and many other YouTubers. And this is where the last semblance of a relationship died between Aaron and John. Aaron made it clear from the rebirth of Game Grumps that he wanted it to be a friendly hub for people to go to, and anyone who didn't align with these viewpoints would be cast out. It doesn't matter that Aaron mentioned words like this in the past, nor did it matter if this resulted in bridges being burned. Aaron made it clear that unless you aligned with his current views, you were out of his life. We saw this with Aaron going out of his way to attack animator Serpello, who made a 12-minute 15-second animation about every storytime animation. The quick and pretty funny animation highlighted how overblown and clickbait these channels were, targeting people like the Odd Ones Out, Jane Animations, for these practices, but in a light-hearted way. Aaron, on the other hand, who was friends with Jaden and James, even going on tour with them, was very quick to voice his displeasure on Twitter about this, saying the following in a tweet reply to Serpello.
This is mean. I got made fun of like this all the time when I made cartoons, and it absolutely sucked. It didn't give me a thick skin or make me a better artist or make me think more about what I was doing. It just hurts. The fact that all these people patting you on the back for this cartoon are old school Newgrounds types with very few storytime animators commenting speaks volumes. You can use this thread to pretend that it's all in good fun, but it's not fun. It's mean and it hurts. These are kids who are all creating, sharing themselves, and trying to find a way to belong. This video only serves to segregate two groups of individuals, both primarily populated by people who desperately want to connect with one another.
People were very quick to point out that Serpello's video was very light-hearted, and Aaron was blowing it way out of proportion. Faf9 said,
"It really isn't that deep. Pello's videos aren't meant to be taken seriously. This seems a bit excessive."
And Josh, the animator, had this to say.
Dude, it's not a big deal. People have different opinions about things and that's okay. Seems pretty tame to me.
Sir Pello ended up responding to Aaron, defending himself on the matter, and clarifying his stance.
Wow, Aaron, I seriously don't mean any harm with this. I don't mind them making their stuff. Yes, it's with jokes and stuff, but the last thing I want to do is hurt. I even watch a few Storytime animators. I even try to imitate the style of the animation and respect that. Instead of, haha, they don't move. I know how you feel. Some made fun of my videos too, but I know some are jokes, and some are being mean. If you really think I tried to hurt the Storytime animator community, then I apologize. That wasn't my intentions. I wanted to take the joke on everyone, not just one group. And if you want, I can even explain to you every single joke in the whole video.
And this is where Oni, a fellow animator and longtime friend of Aaron, rose to the defense of Sir Pello and put Aaron on blast for his take.
Newgrounds made you, and it's probably the place with the least hate that you've ever gotten anywhere online. You say you don't read comments, maybe that's why you think it's better. It's the internet, you laughed hard at SF Chode. P.S. Pello's cartoon is funny jabs. Christ almighty, grow up.
Many people called Aaron out for this sort of joke being made from his Newgrounds days, and called him a bit of a hypocrite from it. And when Aaron issued a half apology, SpazKid, a fellow animator from Aaron's time on Newgrounds, brought up the fact that Aaron had a history of throwing people under the bus when it came to progression and brand image. And this is why it's so important to mention these character traits between John and Aaron. On the surface, one may be able to look past them or tolerate them, but together was always going to be a recipe for disaster. Aaron's squeaky clean image and brand persona is what prevented him and John from working together, as Aaron would always take the brand over the friendship. With the John drama, Aaron was found to be liking tweets denouncing John and even speaking at how John would never ever be coming on Game Grumps again whilst doing a Q&A on tour, remarking that this really was John's decision after all.
It's been a long time since I talked to John. We're not on bad terms. We're on fine terms. It's just that he lives across the country. Questionable if he'll be on the show on Guest Grumps due to recent things that have been said.
Yeah, very questionable.
Do not agree with any of those things.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want to promote that idealism.
Yeah, it's it was always kind of maybe yes, maybe no. Because of that, like, it's probably a lot closer to no. But that's not our fault. That's not our fault. That's just something that happens.
And whilst Aaron's problems stem from how he is perceived in the public eye, John's issue is another that would end up causing the clash between the two of them. John is incredibly impulsive. When the Grumps had another issue with Danny, John's replacement, being accused of having a sexual relationship with a fan in an abuse of power situation, John could not help himself by tweeting, "So does this mean we finally get to finish Sonic 06? This impulsiveness led John to drop hints along the way of what went wrong with Game Grumps, go on that podcast and make every wrong choice in the world when it came to dialogue, as well as move from coast to coast in an instant, hitting reset on his entire life. So it really leaves one big elephant in the room. The question that everyone is asking, and the last big hurdle to cross. What was the real reason John left Game Grumps? Well, the answer to that has been staring us in the face for a very long time.
One thing I did want to ask you, that a lot of people, this was the #1 question on our subreddit, so I feel obligated to ask you. I'm not going to pressure you to say whatever you want about it, but a lot of people, even to this day, which I know is insane, people are weird about this. You know what's coming. People want to know what's the real story behind the Game Grumps split up.
How much you want to troll? You want to get me in?
I'm just asking the questions people want.
It was nothing, really, honestly. Just creative differences. That's it. The end. Please stop asking me. Here's the thing. If I sit here and I go, I can't answer that. Can't answer that. Looks worse. Yeah. There's nothing. It's no big deal. It was like 5 years ago. You know, we were just on different creative paths. And then that's it.
That's a very fair and respectful answer. Thank you for your frankness.
Yeah.
Because of the NDA being put in place, we were never going to, nor will we ever, hear an official answer from the two ex-partners, especially not when the two make ample opportunities to take jabs at each other the moment any transgression happens. For all of the crazy harebrained ideas Conspiracy Grumps came up with since the creation of the subreddit, a lot of progression ended up getting made on some theories, with the one of note being from user Talented Lobster, who claimed he had narrowed down the Eye of the Storm to stem from E3 2013. Whilst no out-and-out big blow-up happened at E3, it's very much believed that it was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. We know from Jerry Terry's comment earlier in this film that John had been thinking about moving back to New York for a while, but it was Nicole who had to convince him to stay. Whatever was going on under the surface was clearly becoming too much for John to take. And do you want to know the best bit? We can actually see moments of something that John treasured so much slipping away from him. In a bizarre video that was deleted but recovered from Ross's channel on YouTube, showed that for a time, Danny wasn't going to replace John after all, but star alongside him.
Look at this dang ass game. It's legitimately in my top 10.
I hate video games! Hey guys, you wanna hang out and play video games? Sorry guys, we gotta hang out and play video games. Oh, hey, this is Steam Train!
A new show on Game Grumps.
All aboard on the train.
We're your conductors.
Russ!
And Danny.
It's a show about you computer games, you play them on the computer.
Modern and classic.
DOS and not so DOS.
Are you drunk?
What?
So all aboard!
Choo-choo!
This ultimately shows that Aaron's idea of a hub of creators was being put into motion way before John left. And if anything, John really didn't like this direction. When it came to E3, not only were the Grumps there, but also Ross and Danny, the new stars of the soon-to-be upcoming show Steam Train. On June 11th, John was there, and everything was fine. The next day on June 12th, several sources commented that he was mysteriously missing. Aaron ended up going on the Game Station's livestream without him, using Barry in his stead, and from a body language perspective, he looked tired and a bit stressed. The next day, John was still sick, saying he had the flu. Then, whatever happened on June 14th. Both accounts went radio silent. June 15th, the Game Grumps Twitter mentioned that they had to switch to one episode a day because of circumstances outside of their control. This post got a ton of upvotes, with John himself replying with a simple, "Damn, you guys are good." So what happened? Well, it turns out that there was a clash behind the scenes. It's no secret that John was thinking of leaving Grumps because of his personality differences with Aaron, but John was integral to the success of the show. In a nutshell, he was kinda stuck there. Meanwhile, Aaron had a bit of a complex when it came to brand image, and more importantly, how he wanted Game Grumps Incorporated to be run. And this is the kicker. John increasingly felt like a lot of decisions were being made without his consent. John always made it clear that JonTron was his main creative outlet, and he never wanted Game Grumps to be seen as something that was different from what it was. Aaron, on the other hand, couldn't have been further from this take. More and more internally, there was power struggle after power struggle over who really ran Game Grumps. Rather than there being a partnership, the two would constantly get into fights over what they wanted to happen, and it ended up being Aaron who'd wrestled control away from John with the Creator Hub idea. When John ended up getting drunk at E3 and having a hangover, not attending PR events, etc., it's almost certain that a fight broke out between the two of them surrounding Aaron's greatest fear, public image. John, who was having more and more taken away from him, being belittled constantly by someone who was meant to be a friend and a partner, but who in reality ended up being an angry, over-controlling boss, finally had enough, and overnight ditched his Californian life to move to New York. The entertainer, who was not being appreciated, had had enough. John left Game Grumps with a buffer of 3 more episodes in the tank. Sources tell me that Aaron pleaded with John after his move, but John had nothing left to give. He had made his mind up, and this is what he was going to do. Running out of options, Aaron hired a lawyer to negotiate settlement to buy John out of the company, the reason for the NDA. In the meantime, the episodes of Steam Train were brought forward to air right away, and Danny was brought in as an emergency replacement for John, a post he has never left since. The discussions of settlement stretched on for a while, and on December 18th, 2014, Aaron would gain complete control over Game Grumps Incorporated. Danny never wanted to replace John. He wanted to make Steam Train with Ross, and his position as the new not-so-grump was the victim of circumstance. The actions of the two parties forced Game Grumps into a position where the only way it could continue was with a sharp turn into a different place. Aaron's quick thinking did keep the channel alive and allowed him to fully visualize this Creator Hub idea, and for many years, Aaron didn't need to worry about animation being the only source of income. His show, with new co-hosts, would be all he needed. John wasn't part of Game Grumps for very long. In fact, he made up just over 1 year of its entire life. Realistically speaking, if you look at Grumps today, it's very much the work of Aaron and Danny. When I think about what's transpired and my attitude on the infighting that has happened, I don't necessarily blame Aaron or John for what they did. It's like any kind of divorce with a child. That's the nature of the game, dude. That's Game Grumps. Have you ever watched an episode of Game Grumps before?
Never.
Yeah, me neither.
I lost interest after John left the show.
Oh, you salty Sandra.
5 years later, I can make that joke. Oh, cool, you got it.
Split-ups happen if you're on separate paths in life. And whilst I'm sure John was absolutely gutted to lose his child in Game Grumps, I'm sure the problems he faced in the role of Not-So-Grump far outweighed staying on. Ultimately, when you look at John nowadays, he does look genuinely happy and makes really great content. As far as Game Grumps go, he has washed his hands with it and fully intends to move forward with his life on YouTube. Game Grumps recently celebrated their 10-year anniversary, and John wasn't brought up once in the entire video. To be completely honest with you, what with Aaron's PR-obsessed focus that has carried him through his YouTube career, the same focus that clashed so hard with John's, it broke a friendship and a YouTube channel apart, I doubt he ever will again.
There comes a time when we must realize who is the best player, and that's John.
Wait a second.
And that's John, because John won the goal and he went for the win. Don't you know what I'm talking about? There comes a time when we must realize who is the best player, and that's John.
Wait a second.
And that's John, because John won the goal and he went for the win. Don't you know what I'm talking about? Aaron won the game. Won the won the
Hi, Cassette here. You have no idea how much work has gone into this video. It has been basically a year and a bit's worth of work. I just want to say thank you so much for sticking to the end. Wow, I can't believe I've done it finally. I'm so thrilled that you stuck through to the end. Thank you so much. This is a really big step for me getting my first video out there. There is more to come, more amazing stuff, so please hit subscribe if you want to check out the next video when it comes out. Also follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/itscassette. I'm also going to be streaming on Twitch pretty soon after this as well, so that's twitch.tv/itscassette. We'll be hanging out, playing some games and talking about the video and stuff, and just having a bit of the old celebration now that it's out. So thank you so much for watching this through, and for all the support. It means the world. Take care. Bye-bye.
Is it over? God damn. How did you do that?
For showtimes and more, visit twitter.com/itscassette. And thanks for watching.